to sort of really give a lot of recognition and credit to that, and much more importantly, also able to pull people from the universities and come and join us. But I think the most important contribution, which we have not really heard a lot in this conference, is that she has been able to revive and regularize Pakistan horizon. And of course, a lot of credit goes to Dr. Tanveer Khalid, who has been really instrumental as an editor. But I think that's a major achievement that a journal which was for some time really off the scene, suspended, but for the last I would say almost decade and a half is now on the horizon, and perhaps one of the well-known and respected journals. So that way, it's really great to really recognize that. There is a slight change that we are going to have. I'm going to have John Pereira #1, Dr. And then of course the Ambassador Janjua, Kamina Janjua as #2, and she's going to speak on a slightly different topic, the United Nations and multilateralism, increasingly marginal or critically central to global peace. So that's the presentation that she's going to make. And of course, Amir Rana topic is already indicated. And let me point this out for you. Non-state actors and transactional terrorism, changing dynamics of policy implications. Now, before I do go further, I will just take a few minutes to put a few sort of teasers or questions, which some of them may respond, may not respond, and if need be, maybe I'll try to see if I can respond to those. So one of the things that I sort of want to draw your attention to is where are the threats to, or what are the threats to global peace? That's one of the questions. Peace for whom? And much more importantly, from my perspective, do great powers really treat threat as global peace, or do they promote global peace, or do they promote threat? I mean, this is one of the things that one needs to think through, and it depends on which lens and from where you are looking at global peace. So if one were to really put this in some context, and which I do want to, and I will very quickly identify what, in my view, are some of the basic, if I may say, forces of disruption, which lead to a situation where peace becomes a very important commodity. So one is, of course, wars and conflicts. You see, why wars are there? Not necessarily every war has a different cause, and I'm not going to get into that. Someone else has to do that. But what I want to suggest to you is wars and conflicts are innate to human nature. That is the Hobbesian word. That conflict is innate to human nature. Therefore, what you have is that states are in a perpetual situation of war. Thereby, it is really asking too much in terms of why should they have peace. If conflict is the basis, and one can go on and give you a detail of various wars after particularly the Second World War to contemporary times, and much more importantly, to the so-called non-state wars, non-state actors and wars, which became very important in the period of 1980s to almost 2021. So that's one, but I will not go into this, why change occurred or not occurred, but what I want to point out is that wars and conflict, A, are perpetual, B, they lead to social, economic, political transformation in societies. If they do, so the question is who and where the peace should take place. Is it a global demand, or is it a demand which depends on bilateral and multilateral or regional levels, and therefore it is state to state that one should really work on. The second point that I want to point out for you is the sources of disruption. Is protest, whether it is in a passive form or on a regular form. Protests lead to sometimes reform, sometimes protests also lead to revolution, and revolutions in history are rare. Therefore, most of the time you have to think in terms of protests, and when you think of revolutions, that means institutions, values, and the structures of the societies really change. But whereas when you think of protests, it can be both internal, external, and one example today is look at these Ukraine and Gaza war, which we have spoken a lot yesterday, and is still in the news. The question is, what has happened to these global protests, which took place in different parts of the world? Did they facilitate peace? Did anyone want peace? Why nobody was listening to? So that's a question mark that one has. What is the significance and salience of protests, and how should one really interpret? Now, I'm not saying that protests are not desirable. What I'm suggesting is that what is the impact, to what degree they are able to perpetuate and avoid conflict, or to what degree they are able to promote peace. That is something which one needs to think about. So protest as a vehicle of promoting or seeking peace, is it a desirable goal? Is it a successful goal? Therefore, one has to sort of think about this. The third force of disruption with which today we almost all of us live is basically innovation and technology, and there's a lot which has been said and discussed about it. So when you look at technology, what has happened is that it is the instantaneousness, the blowing away of the territorial boundaries in every sense of the term, whether you're looking at space or you're looking at social space. Therefore, you have to really sort of understand and see, is technology and internet and this, blowing away of the territoriality as a consequence of technological innovation, is it really causing greater or intensifying conflict, or is it facilitating or can help us in promoting peace? We talk in terms of disinformation and many other things, deception that one can talk. So here one has to sort of really think this through and ask oneself this fundamental question. The fourth point that I want to make is that, besides innovations and technology, personalities and leadership, they also play a critical role in disrupting the order the way it exists. And when I say personalities, this means the personalities of innovating technology. Whether you want to go back to Einstein or you want to look at the Zuckerbergs and others of today, that here there are individuals who within a span of short time are able to disrupt the existing order in a way that we had not even anticipated. So when you think of connectivity, when you think of some degree of order, it is one part of it. On the other side, there is the impact which we have not really fully understood or comprehend. So therefore one has to sort of really have some understanding. And it is in this context that one can go on and talk about the leadership. Here I just want to mention 2 or 3 things, particularly with reference to the talk that we had yesterday. I had a long list to point out, but I am not going to get into that. But I just want to see, as I raised a few questions with reference to who, peace for whom. Do great powers want peace, or do they not want peace? Is there a global governing body? Is United Nations, and here is a question for you, is United Nations in a position to play the role of a global peacekeeper? Do we need to really change the structure of United Nations? Who can do that? Why should anybody really be interested in? These are some of the questions that one would like to sort of really think through. But at the same time, what I want to also point out to you is that the modern world, despite this nature of conflict that continues to persist has become so interdependent and so interconnected that it is very difficult, almost impossible to think in terms of only war and conflict. So one has to think in terms of, how do we go about promoting partnerships? What is it that individual nation states can do? Because part of the difficulty is that the very nature of the state system is conflictual. It is not peace-driven. It is driven by conflict and warfare. Therefore, you have to really rethink how do you manage a state system which leads to peace. Now, given this kind of context, there was considerable degree of thought, and I'm sure most of you have heard this yesterday, and I want to take a slightly different position on this as of yesterday. Most of the speakers and literature that was cited that United States of America is on decline. And I can also go back and say, yes, starting from 1988, Paul Kennedy was one of the leading writers who made a case that, look, as a consequence of what he called imperial outstretch, United States of America has gone beyond its economic capacity and therefore is on decline. Now, there are more than one writers, and I don't want to cite them, but I have written them, that there are more than one writers today, both American, Western, and others, and of course our own people who are of a strong view that United States of America is on decline. There is a difference, and it is a philosophical difference. I'm an academic. When people talk in terms of certitude, I get worried. I'm a skeptic. One has to be a skeptic in the sense that, yes, we are not certain. So the debate today in the world, around the world, is, basically around certainty and certitude. And hence you have to have some understanding about this. So the point that I would like to convey to you is that United States of America, if you are looking at it today, there is one school which says it is on the decline. The other school of the second perspective is that it is a multiplex world. It is becoming multilateral, multipolar. Therefore, one has to really sort of see this and have understanding. Given the recent phenomenon of Trump, there are many who have come to believe that globalization is over, and therefore we have to really live with a world which is going to be really polarized, divided, and hence the difficulty that one has. Now, I tend to argue and suggest to you that for the foreseeable future, and when I say foreseeable future, 25 to 2035, United States of America and China are making the world still bipolar. The world is bipolar at best, with Russia rising, and if succeeding in Ukraine, it will become tripolar. But along with this, is the nature of threats going to change? Will the world become more peaceful? That's a question that one needs to really sort of look at. And here, I want to also assert that rising China is a very prudent, very cautious, and a reluctant global power. I repeat, it's a prudent, cautious, and reluctant global power. Whereas, if you look at United States of America, it has become, in the words of an American scholar, a rogue superpower, which is working for itself, its own national interest. How long? That's a different debate. But the point that partly was also made in a different way yesterday by Dr. Zedi, I would also like to sort of build around it that China's rise took place in a capitalist economic order. Therefore, China would not be interested, at least in the short term, which is these next 10 years, in doing away with the order. It will certainly want as they put it very openly and frankly, respect, equality, and a proper state in the system, which means the way IMF, the World Bank, and other global institutions, even United Nations, if it exists, there is a need to really accommodate the Chinese interest, and Chinese are going to work very hard and push this on that. So I will make a case along that. And therefore, one has to really sort of see it in that context. Then the final point that I would like to sort of put across for you is, here are a few things that I want to just suggest for all of the three speakers, and we'll see how they respond. Now, states must reduce and rationalize defense expenditures and avoid conflict and wars. Is that a rational expectation? If you want global peace, can you really demand that all states must rationalize defense expenditure? The demand from the great powers is increase defense expenditure. If you look at Europe, that is what they're saying. So that's one part of it. The second, which is equally important, can you develop a shared global vision, that there's a broad consensus that you really want to have something? Global interdependence, can it be enhanced? Is it possible to change the UN framework? I will stop here. In other words, what I'm asking is it possible to think in terms of expanding the size of Security Council of United Nations? Is it really something which can promote or lead to peace if there is a greater number of members rather than only 5 members, and who have veto? Can we do something about it? So here, if you're thinking of global peace, is United Nations or any other institution really capable of doing it? We will have some input from the Honorable ex-ambassador to see if he can. Now, having said this, now I'm going to turn over to Don Pereira and see what he has to say. And of course, I have been given a warning, and I will also suggest to you, let me give you exact time. It's just 1 minute to 2 o'clock. So you will have 15 minutes, and I will issue a warning around 2 minutes. Okay? So everyone can have 15 minutes each, and that is good enough. Okay? Thank you so much, and thank you so much, each one of you, for being here. It is an excellent panel. I'm sure you're going to enjoy and learn things which you have not learned anywhere else. So over to you, John Pereira. No, sorry. Unless you want to go there.
Thank you, Dr. Saeed. So you gave a very fascinating introduction, and you touched on what I have been really looking for in this conference, and I'm still searching for it. We came to talk about the Bandung, what happened in Bandung Declaration, the different vision that the countries that got together there had about a new world order, and the existing one, a world order which we have up to now called the rules-based international order, which the Western countries really pushed for in the aftermath of the 2 world wars. And they came up with the idea of the UN system and the mechanisms of international covenants, the UN Human Rights Council, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, which were based on rules and structure, and which offered the possibility of accountability. But we are seeing now that that system is not working, because we see it has become so glaringly obvious on the television when we watch what is happening in Palestine. It is shocking, and it goes on, it's continuing. Now, actually, when we look at it, probably worse things happened before, in earlier periods, but we didn't see it with our own eyes. The violations, say, that took place in Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, we don't see those. We didn't see that, so it hasn't struck us so much as what's happening now. So the system has not really been working. Essentially, I see the so-called rules-based international order as one that was devised by the Western powers although there were the other countries also participated in setting up those institutions, but probably the driving force was the Western powers, which are the ones that interpret it, which control it. Now I say this because I come from Sri Lanka, a country which has been subjected to the so-called rules-based international order. And I wanted to share some of the experience, because we, a small country, so therefore vulnerable, but also a country enveloped in war, trapped in war for 3 decades, an internal war, where there were indeed huge human rights violations, displacements of populations, killings, war crimes. So in a way we fell within what the violations that the international order tries to prevent. And first of all, our story begins with the bilateral intervention. We have been subjected to both bilateral and multilateral interventions. When, at an earlier point, in the 1980s, the bilateral intervention came from India. When Sri Lanka descended into civil war, and just to summarize the problem that we had in our country, it is that we have basically 3 communities, 3 nations living in one island. The biggest one being the Sinhalese, 75%. The other 2, Tamil, and we call them Muslims. The Muslims also are a separate community, 25%. And in a democracy where if you get 50% of the vote, you form the government, Sinhalese have 75%. So they always form the government. And they always make the decisions. They make the decisions according to their vision of what is safe and good, and not according to what the minorities think. So, and we have several ugly, very ugly examples of what happened because of the use of the majority, the decision to take away the citizenship rights of a group of Tamil people who came 200 years ago, brought by the British, to work on the tea plantations. And when the British left in 1948, the Sri Lankan state said, those Tamils also should leave, because they were brought by the British, they are not our citizens. And they were left in a very desperate situation. And more recently, during the COVID time, when everyone was very terrified about what this COVID was. And our government took a decision that anyone who died of COVID should be cremated. Our Muslim population said, don't do this, it's a sin. But the government did it. For several months, they forcibly cremated anyone who died. Now most of our people, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, they accepted it. But the Muslims didn't. But they had to succumb to it. So this is the use of and so this problem in our country led to 3 decades of civil war. And India intervened. India supported the militancy when it arose in the 80s. So we have experienced that. Then India also. They also tried to help us to solve it, having started the militancy, having encouraged the militancy. When it got out of hand, they signed an agreement with us called the Indo-Lanka Accord, where they sent the Indian army to try and disarm the Tamil militants, and also sort of compel the Sri Lankan government to give autonomy to the provinces. So we have a provincial council system which continues to this day. So that is, and I think it's a good thing. It's the way you can share power. There is some sharing of power now on ethnic lines because of the provincial council system that India brought in. But after that, then came the end of the war. And when the Sri Lankan government finally won the war in 2009, the Western countries urged instead a negotiated settlement. They didn't want the war to end because they thought probably there was a diaspora Tamil lobby in the Western countries, and also the Western ethos of that, that the minorities have rights, let's negotiate, that's the best way for a solution. But the Sri Lankan state decided to end it militarily, saying there's no point, you can't negotiate with the LTT, they're terrorists, you have to eliminate them. Now, so Sri Lanka defied the Western pressures and won the war, but at a very big cost in terms of human rights violations, terrible human rights violations. And in that process, we were actually helped by China and Pakistan, which gave us the military equipment to deal with the insurrection, with the militancy. But the Western countries didn't. And after that, they started to, they brought Sri Lanka before the UN Human Rights Council, where they passed resolution. There were resolutions passed in the UN Human Rights Council, which Sri Lanka opposed, and which countries like China and Pakistan also supported Sri Lanka on, but the majority were with the Western countries. Sri Lanka argued in terms of the Bandung Declaration. Now I see that on the grounds of national sovereignty, that this is an internal problem, there should be non-interference, there should be equal treatment, our government said. Treat us equally, you're not treating us equally. Why are you going after us, asking us to have war crimes trials for our generals and for our politicians, when we see what's happening in Iraq, in Libya, in Israel? So we made those arguments, but in the UN Human Rights Council, we were always defeated. So we still are before the UN Human Rights Council, having to now respond to what the Western world wants. They want us to investigate the past. They want us to have war crimes trials. They want us to see who among our generals and our politicians did this. So first in Sri Lanka, very hard for the government to do it, because the general population, 75%, think that what happened had to happen. It's good, the war is over now, it's better now than it was in the past. They don't want. And for them, the generals and the politicians who won the war are heroes. So now for a government to try and punish them is going to be very difficult. The Sri Lankan government's present strategy to deal with these issues is to promise reform. It's always promising it will do things, but to drag their feet. There is no domestic pressure on the government to actually resolve these issues. And today, the moral credibility of the UN system, of the international system, has eroded very much. So that pressure also is off Sri Lanka. And now, because the multilateral system is getting weaker, and we can see the danger, the vulnerability of small countries which are next to big countries. Sri Lanka has got close to India. Recently, the Indian Prime Minister visited Sri Lanka, and they signed a defense agreement. We don't know what it is. It's called a memorandum of understanding, but it has been done without any transparency. We really don't know what it is, but we think it responds to the Indian concern that over the time during the war years, that Sri Lanka got too close to China. And China has actually come in. China has invested in Sri Lanka. China built a big port in the bottom of our country, in Sri Lanka. And it's a port that could be used both for military purposes as well as for economic purposes. So India is naturally very concerned about it. It does not want China in Sri Lanka because it's a big security threat to India, and that is understandable. So the Sri Lankan government, the previous Sri Lankan government was close to China. But the present one has decided that, probably decided, they don't discuss these things openly, but looking at what's happening in the world, the way big countries can just take over small countries, can cause havoc in small countries. I think they have decided that it's better to accommodate India's concerns. So we have now signed this defense MOU with India, but I think also we have kept the options open of relationships with other countries. It is not as if we have only with India. So we have our relationship, for instance, our biggest trade partners are the European Union and the United States. And now, in fact, when I go back to Sri Lanka, I have been asked to come as part of a civil society group to meet a European Union delegation that's coming to look into what's called the GSP plus tariff concession, which supports our exports to the EU, which is very important to us. We are a country that went bankrupt recently. But in order to get this tariff concession, we have to comply with 27 international human rights covenants. Also, show that we are doing well on reconciliation, that we are following what the UN Human Rights Commission has set for us. So we are also trapped there. So we are trapped multilaterally, and also we are trapped bilaterally. It's a small country, but I think we have to navigate. We have to navigate these things. We can't go into confrontation. So we have to find a wise way to wend our way through these conflicting forces. So that's what I would like to, and what I'm really interested, I know I have spoken about only Sri Lanka, and I'm hoping that in the discussion that follows, that we will also be able to see what type of system there can be, just system for the entire world, which for small countries is going to be very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this such an insightful, informative, and in some ways very provocative presentation that John Pereira has made. And please, as he has pointed out, think of the criminal justice against the generals. Think of Hamid Rahman Commission report. Why we don't want to reveal? Because as he was pointing out, their generals also do not want any criminal investigation because the war is over. Same is the situation here, but we can have more discussion later on. Let's get to the leading diplomat that we had in this session, and I'm really very happy and proud to see her. It is an incredibly good job, particularly being a woman, to rise at that level in Pakistan and be able to represent Pakistan. I think she deserves an applaud before she speaks.
Thank you very much, Dr. I don't want to take all the laurels myself. I've got some very bright, smart Pakistani women diplomats who risen to the top and have very effectively represented Pakistan, of which the country should be proud of. And one is here, Ratia. We thank her for the wonderful job she did. I also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Masuma for having this excellent conference, and Dr. Khalid for leading us today in this process. I must say those who are sitting here are really the committed ones, because the rest are gone to the most sexy topic in the Indus Water Treaty. So we are not that sexy, but we tried to make it so. Thank you very much. As Dr. Shafqat said, I will be focusing on, which is the topic separate, different from what is being published, and I discussed it with Dr. Masuma and Dr. Tanvir as well, and they said, you say what you want to say, so I will say what I want to say. The topic I'd like to discuss today is the United Nations and multilateralism, increasingly marginal or critically central to global peace. A topical issue, I hope. The United Nations Charter, ladies and gentlemen, in its preamble grandly proclaims that the UN shall succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Article 1 of the Charter specifies that maintaining peace and security is a primary purpose of the organization. Judged by these high goals, the UN's performance has been at best mixed. And I will make a couple of comments on what you said, Dr. Pereira, because I was in the Human Rights Council as well when Sri Lanka was discussed. In the post-World War II period, peace between great powers was a function of mutual deterrence, rather than UN playing any key role. Below that level, the UN did contribute to peace and security through various mechanisms, including by providing a forum for addressing disputes, maintaining peace in conflict zones when peace was established, and by contributing to an elaborate system of agreements that restrained aggressive state behavior and also promoted interstate cooperation in key areas. You would know. In the present highly turbulent times, the challenges to UN's peace function are even more formidable. A relatively stable bipolar system was followed by a brief period of unipolarity. This is giving way to an unstable multipolar system. The instability largely stems from an aggressive bid by the lead power, the US, to reassert its primacy and in the process to refashion the international system more to its liking. Does this portend increasingly marginality for the UN, or will there be space for it to address the current grave threats to peace? What specifically are these threats? Questions that you have also asked. The principal threat to peace emanates from the intensifying rivalry between the US and China. Regional conflicts, particularly in Ukraine, in the Middle East, make the global political situation more febrile. And the worsening global political situation is aggravated by a whole range of factors: intense economic and trade competition, climate change, destabilizing new technologies, and arms build-up. A disconcerting strengthening of retrogressive right-wing forces in many countries accentuates these threat factors. A small answer to your many questions. At a more fundamental level, the threat to global peace is arising from a fraying of international norms. These norms, whether in the areas of trade relations, human rights, access to technologies, arms control, are being steadily eroded. This is leading to a dangerous unpredictability in the international system, with a regression from a rules-based order to a more Hobbesian system that you referred to. This is not to say that the existing norms are just, that they do not reflect power asymmetries. Indeed, these norms are largely inequitable and are skewed towards protecting the interests of the more powerful. And yet they do reflect an advance on complete lawlessness. Also, wholesale jettisoning of these norms without replacing them with more equitable rules is a recipe for anarchy and not for a more just and stable global order. The UN is an embodiment of and a key contributor to global norms. These norms underpin global public goods such as international security, smooth trade flows, freedom of navigation, and human rights observance. Why are these norms and hence global public goods under threat? Your question. Professor Nye, drawing on the work of the American economist Charles Kindleberger, had pointed out that global public goods are provided by coalitions led by the strongest powers. When there is a transition in the international leadership, then there is an inadequate provision of public goods. To a great extent, this is what we're seeing today. The US is no longer willing to uphold many international norms and be the guarantor of important global public goods. The present US administration feels that international rules have not worked to its advantage. It wants deep changes in many of these rules, especially trade rules. It expects others to share the burden of providing public goods, such as maritime security. And most problematically, it sees little value in many agreed upon norms, including on climate change, human rights, terrorism, and public health. This radical undermining of global norms has thrown the international system into turmoil. The leading global power is not willing to, or perhaps no longer capable of underwriting the norms that sustain the international system. And as yet, there is no real alternative power that is in a position to take its place. In Professor Nye's term, the world is caught in the Kindleberger trap. This is a useful insight, but its flaw is that it ascribes very little agency to countries other than the lead powers to influence outcomes. And this brings me to the critical role of multilateralism and the UN in mitigating the threats of that the world faces. For small and medium-sized powers, it is clearly essential to have commonly agreed sets of rules that would govern inter-state relations. It is in their interest to form coalitions to establish such rules. But in the current environment, is this feasible? After all, we have entered a period which is characterized by a naked assertion of power, unburdened by notions of legality. The stress is on transactional relations and bilateral deals. Just as Mr. Paga said yesterday of the World Bank, that every country should go in and do its own deal with the US. And now this is not something that the World Bank should be advising. So what is the space for multilateralism? In reality, other than the US, hardly any other major country is interested in upending the international system. They would rather exercise their power and influence through the mediating framework of agreed upon international norms. This opens up space for concerted action in the multilateral fora to shore up norms and safeguard global public goods. Also, ladies and gentlemen, the greater instability in the international system and the more intense the rivalry between the major powers, the greater will be the incentive for the smaller powers to come together to resist external pressures. Some of you may not agree with this. And yesterday, Dr. Akbar had said, the new economic order is dead. I'd like to disagree with him here later. In such a situation, a revival of broad groupings, the NAM and the G77, should not only be desirable, but also feasible. You may question how. Why should be the priority areas? What should be the priority areas for multilateral action? Your question. The most urgent task is to bring an end to ongoing wars and to prevent geopolitical tensions between great powers from erupting into outright conflict. This is squarely within the mandate of the UN, but it would be unrealistic to expect much from the UN Security Council, with the major powers being at loggerheads. The UN General Assembly, though, could be used to bring a strong consensus against the use of force, something that's happened in the past as well. In certain volatile regions, the UN can be used to dampen tensions, especially when the major powers are not in an obstructionist mode. South Asia is a case in point. In the present exceedingly dangerous situation between Pakistan and India, the UN can be mobilized to de-escalate the situation. The UN Secretary General's office can play a critical role. The belligerent power, India, can be presented with options to climb down, which is somewhat being done right now with the help of the UN and the Security Council press release yesterday, as well as some of our friends. Diplomacy can have some space to function in the UN when it simply can't in the bilateral context. However, in general, countries would achieve more in the UN by focusing on norms that promote stability in the international system, initiatives in the areas of arms control, especially in relation to use of new technologies, terrorism, climate change, human rights, particularly in regard to migrants and public health and pandemics, can be a priority. For these areas are flashpoints which left unaddressed could spark conflicts. In the immediate term, though, it is the international economic and trade system that requires the most urgent attention. The UN's role in this area, never too pronounced, has steadily diminished since the 70s, when the discussions on the new international economic order were thwarted by the developed countries, but they continued in the UN. But if turbulence unleashed by the Trump administration continues unabated, there may be a possibility for the UN to weigh in by creating a broad political consensus on the necessity of an equitable, rules-based economic and trade system. This could serve as a break, however slight, on more egregious unilateral instincts of the US. However, the real action would need to take place in the WTO. In the short term, most countries could be compelled to make bilateral trade deals with the US, but initiatives can also be taken in the WTO, even in the presence of an obstructionist US. The US is, of course, a major trading nation that, let's not forget, it represents only 11% of world trade. There are other countries of sufficient combined weight to be able to take initiatives in the WTO to preserve certain fundamentals of the global trading system, including special and differential treatment, the MFN's principle, and an effective dispute settlement procedure. This should be accompanied by an insistence on strengthening the development aspects of the trading system, especially expanding the policy space for developing countries, on which a lot of work has been done in UNCTAD. Can this succeed? It can, because there is strong interest on the part of most countries to insulate the trade system from unilateral actions by any one WTO member. And you see Trump going up, forward, then backwards, so there is areas where work can be done. And to achieve this, it would be necessary to not only reinforce existing trade norms, but to rebalance these to some extent in favor of developing countries. In short, the world is in a state of transition. The lead power is focused on reasserting its dominance, especially over a fast-rising competitor. In the process, the normative underpinnings of the international system are coming under stress. The UN and multilateralism in general cannot directly resolve major conflicts. However, by strengthening norms in contentious areas, multilateral initiatives can put constraints on state behavior that threatens global peace. And if global rules are to be reformulated, then this creates an invaluable opportunity to introduce greater equity in these rules. Developing countries should avail of this opportunity, thereby extracting some benefits from an otherwise deeply worried international system. I have some additional points, but I'll stop here. One, can NAM be revived? Two, what is the danger of the emergence of new hegemons, which is happening right now? And what role can the UN play in regional conflicts such as Kashmir and the Middle East? And what may be done in the UN on the issue of terrorism? I think there we have Amir Rana sir who can elaborate further. Thank you very much. And thank you
Thank you so much. Now, Amir Rana, you have a challenging task. Dr. Farzana Sheikh has been trying to make sense of Pakistan. Now you give us a sense, what do you make of these non-state actors? Who was the producer and director of this? These non-state actors, are they really taken care of? Over to you. I've done so much of work on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I'm truly glad to be here and to share panel with Rehman. We will inflect. And though Dr. Saab yourself and all three other panelists tried at most to drag me into a conceptual debate on conflict and peace, but I'll try to be focused on my core argument, which I have built around a few points. But only one small comment, that as the whole world is going under immense transformation, and our brain as well. And a very slow transformation, and a new cortex is going on, and we are hoping in coming centuries that it will overcome the anxiety and emotionalism triggered by medulla. But we have to invest more in the peace. And despite we know that our brain functions well in conflicting situations, as we are witnessing here, what is the discourse is going on in the public spaces, even in policy spaces here in India and Pakistan. So this is the reflection of that. But my core argument is that this transnational terrorism threat is getting all the time is being confused with the proxies. And we, especially in the policy discourses, we take all these militant movements, whether it's happening in Latin America, in South Asia, Middle East, and we perceive them as the proxies of the neighborhood, and maybe in few instances, the states support the militant organizations, the terrorist groups, and they have their mutual interest. And but does it change the character of the terrorist organization and terrorist movements or not? This is the key question. And what compels them to sometimes to challenge their partner or the states supporting them? Is it their ideology or the political motives or something else? And why the states and the societies are hesitant to consider them as an independent actor? So I had tried to can anybody help me to the next slide? So I have focused mainly on the two case studies. One is from the Pakistan and second is from Syria. And Pakistan had got the fragmented jihadi landscape before 9/11, and of course that even the minister in one of the talk show claimed that we had did a dirty job for the US and for the West in Afghanistan. But at that time, these movements were quite fragmented. And the first transformation happened after 9/11. And few of these movements went into transformation and become independent. And they start challenging the state, which wasn't the state haven't never imagined that those proxies can turn against the states. And what had contributed more, it was Al-Qaeda, which transformed them into global jihadist movement. And over the time, we see that the militant organization is here divided in two major camps. One prefer to remain under the shadow of the state, and other become independent. And those become independent, they have been responsible for most of the terrorist incidents in the country. And they absorb the two type of the ideological, they get the inspiration from Al-Qaeda and later from IS. And what is happening right now in Kashmir is apparently both organizations, both trends are reshaping the narrative, especially in Indian side of Kashmir. And very few is focusing more on that. Is it who is really behind the resistance front? Is it the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is a bad organization in the country, or it may be the Al-Qaeda Indian subcontinent, which may be trying influencing them and sometimes force these groups to take their own decision. So this is happened. And by the way, when I had submitted the abstract for this conference, I had no idea that what is going to be happening in our region, and I was thinking to be focused on Syria mainly, and where Hayatun Tahrir Asham had transformed the militant landscape and emerged as a pragmatic militant organization who manages its relationship with the states, especially with Turkey, and with other militant organizations. And it has had influence to other militant groups in the region, and especially those in line with the IS and Al-Qaeda, and provided an opportunity to become a part of the mainstream. And this is also interesting, and a lot of research being done that what had compelled this HTS to be transformed and to become the pragmatic. But most importantly, there's two factors which mainly contribute the militant organization to become more rational actor and inclines towards the having deals with the states, or to be dissolve sometime their whole movement. One is what is the regional political situation. This is very important, and this is happening in the case of Afghanistan as well, and which has compelled them to initiate talks, dialogue with various sectors, but it's mainly with the US. And secondly, they say that their ideological inspiration aren't relevant with the ongoing world order or the global or the regional political order. And they review their strategies, review their tactics, and to decide what to do and how to proceed in the future. And it happened in the case of the HTS, and which very tactfully manages relationship with Turkey, and while forcing the other militant terrorist groups to get disarmed, and which had impacted on many of the Kurdish movements. And we see the Kurdistan Worker Party made a call for disarmament in February this year, and even the HTS made a deal with the Syrian Kurdish parties. So this is, we had seen and we were anticipating that maybe Taliban follow the similar pattern and try to be, and it will give them the inspiration to, so I'm going to be finished my argument. And maybe they will get some inspiration and to follow the HTS model, but they didn't. Again, sometimes the regional political contexts are too complex that these militant organizations don't follow the model, but in some tactics, of course, they copycat it. And now this another question, very important question, is what makes a group transnational? And it may help to understand that what is happening in Afghanistan right now and in Indian occupied Kashmir. Obviously, this is the ideology, political interest, ethnic and racial unity. And then there is another question which we need to have a discourse on, that why groups become proxies. And it may help us to understand that how it's impacting on the geopolitical landscape and how they're acting in the geopolitical landscape in the region. And obviously that they identify their political and ideological alignment which suits them best, like in the case of the Baloch insurgents in this region. They developed their secular credential to whom they think that their relationship with the West can serve them better, and they can create some space for the diplomatic support. So tactical flexibility they try to identify, and sometimes they act on the orders. Maybe it's a very hard word, but on they see where the responses states and their interests converge, and they do get involved in certain activities. And one thing that we usually think that these transnational organizations, they are not a rational actor. They are very much a rational actor, and they know, they keep updating themselves about all the changes happening around them. And this is we had seen in the case of Al-Qaeda, IS, KB, and TTP. And that's why we see that how these movements change their tactics and the strategies. So these were the few points, and the question and core question is that why these groups become proxy and where they keep their independence intact. So this is a core question. We can be seen in the context of Afghanistan and in the context of what is going on in India and Kashmir. So I'm not suggesting anything. I have tried my best to avoid any value judgment and to pass any comment and just raise few questions. That's all from us.
Thank you so much. Amir, you have also tried to be a diplomat. So we have two good diplomats. The only guy who has been very forceful, clear, and incisive is John Pereira. So now the space is open for shoot. Whosoever is ready, I see three hands. I'll start with Dr. Fazana, and then you, and I'll go back. Three questions I've seen.
Thank you.
Please identify the speaker, or if you have it for the entire panel, go ahead.
Thank you, I suppose my question will be mainly directed to George, your presentation very much. Basically, two questions. One is, I seem to have noticed, and do correct me if I'm wrong, that the US-China rivalry is identified as a significant source of international instability, and I think that is in many ways that the US-China rivalry is seen as arguably the greatest source of international instability, and I think most people would agree. But I wonder why it is that here at this conference, the role of Russia, and Putin in particular, as the great destabilizer, has escaped any kind of close scrutiny, because one has to consider that apart from Gaza, the other raging war is in Ukraine, and there we have had really a situation where, to put it very bluntly, a land grab is going on, and there appears to be very little that the UN can do. So that's my first question. What is the role? What can the UN do when it is confronted with a major revisionist power like Russia today? My my second question is, what happens in the event? Again, that's something that hasn't received attention, and I think we know why. But what happens in the event that China seeks to gain control? If China seeks to gain control over Taiwan, People's Republic of China is a member of the UN. Taiwan is not. It stepped down in 1971, or was made to step down. I mean, what sort of leverage could the UN expect to exercise in that event?
Okay, let me take 2 more questions. Okay, you go ahead, sir, and then I'll come to you. Okay. No, there's a gentleman from Russia.
Thank you. Thank you as a representative of a great destabilizer. If I can, I have, thank you very much for these fantastic presentations. I have many questions to every of you, but I don't have a chance to ask all of them.
Yeah, you can ask 2.
Okay. The first question is about a rule-based order. It's a question of common because, in Russian official discourse, there is a huge criticism towards this term, rule-based order, and always they talk that there is an international law-based order. And rule-based order, it is something created in the situation when international law doesn't work. So rule-based order, it means the order based on some customs, traditions, or something like this, some ideas, but not the law. I think that maybe the situation we're talking about with this erosion of international law and rule-based order, both of them, is a situation of the bigger disaster of destruction of all the international order itself. And firstly, we don't have international law working. Then we think that maybe, okay, we don't have law, maybe we have some rules, but now we don't have rules. So maybe we should think about a new step about some regional international laws, regional international law systems for South Asia, for Far East, for Middle East, based on its own traditions and its their own civilizational customs. That's the first question. The second question about United Nations. Thank you very much also for your presentation. Of course, I can't agree with that. Russia is a big destabilizer, but the question is not about it. The question is about what our colleague said. The question is about the role of the United Nations in the conflict resolution. Last 15 years, for example, in the Middle East, we have 2 old conflicts like Western Sahara and Palestinian conflict. And then we have Libya, Syria, Yemen, also we have Sudan. I personally was involved in some diplomatic, Russian diplomacy on Syria and Libya. We can see that the position of Russia and the United States, for example, on Syria, especially in the first years, were not so opposite to each other. We could work with each other, and there was a very big activity of the United Nations, and especially Stefan de Mistura and Kay Pedersen and other special envoys. But finally, we don't have any effect. The only effective conflict resolution in the MENA region last years was in the situation and very limited very limited effectiveness, was in the situation of the direct military assistance of external actors like Russia or Turkey or Iran or somebody else. If you have boots on the ground, if you can participate as a resolver of the conflict with boots on the ground, you can think about some limited success for de-escalation, but not for political resolution. In this situation, maybe the problem of the United Nations, not in the, I don't know, maybe not in the some contradictions between the United States and China or Russia and the United States or somebody else, but maybe the problem is more systematic. It is the question. Thank you.
Great. And it's a UN problem rather than pressure problem. So, lady, you have the last third question.
Would you please repeat the question?
So thank you, first of all, to all the panelists. My question will be for Mr. Amir Rana. Could you please elaborate on the use of social media by these transnational groups to voice their views to the rest of the world? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me go to you first. And there is, on the rule base, if you want to respond to, you can also go ahead. And yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all those questions. You've referred to the US-China rivalry that I mentioned being one of the major sources of instability, and you said that I did make a reference to Russia. Well, there are many conflicts that are happening in the world. I was talking about the major conflict that could have been a cause of instability. If you're talking about Ukraine, I have a view on it. Let's be very clear that the Ukraine situation started when the European Union decided, the NATO countries decided to expand their borders and to go close to Russia. It was not because Russia started a war, it was because the Europeans and the NATO countries did not accept the reality that there was a vulnerability there, and that thing needs to be taken into consideration. So where we are in Europe on Ukraine, etc., has to do a lot with the quote-unquote irrational decision-making, if I may say so, in the context of NATO and its expansionist designs, which it started when it brought some of the other East European countries into NATO. Then you say, you're asking about what would happen in case of Taiwan, can the UN play a role? Well, I can tell you, considering the world as it stands today, China has a pretty irrational actor model, so to say. China would have had many opportunities in the past to take over Taiwan, but it refrained from doing so. It refrained from doing so because it was confident in its own position that there was a one China policy that they were following, and the rest of the world, almost 80% or 90% of the world, said it's a one China policy. There are only a few countries. When you go to look at the vote that takes place, for example, in the WHO on Taiwan's participation as China in the work of WTO, yes, it's got its technical details, but when you look at the reality on ground, it is the majority plus supports that go in favor of do not allow the two China policy to prevail. So there is some degree of understanding of where China stands, and I don't think there is a lot that's written in the Western media about China walking in and taking over Taiwan. But I think there is a great degree of rationality that prevails in China. And they talk about the 5,000 years of civilization. I know you may not agree to it, but that's something that can be helpful to note. On the question of the international based order, on the international law based order, and that there is no rule based order, that the rule based order is more fragile, where there's law and there's rules. So for that law to be implemented, you need to have rules to do so. So both coexist and are extremely useful. And that's why you can't say, and Russia has supported the rule-based order in the WTO as well, in other parts of the UN as well, within the legal system, within the parameters of the international law parameters. Now, if you're talking about international law, it's abysmal what's happening in the context of international law. There is an international conference that is held every couple of years or every year under the Geneva Conventions. This year, because of the pressure from the Western countries and Israeli pressure, that conference could not be held because that conference had to deal with the treatment of occupied people and what the treatment of areas that are under occupation, all of that. And of course, India plays a major role in ensuring that these things won't happen. You said whether we can have a separate laws of regions. Please don't ever advocate that, because it's the international law that can be more powerful and people may want to respect. If you, for example, in the Asian region, in the South Asian region, we have an Asian law or South Asian law. Do you think we'll be able to even draft it? India will not allow that to happen. They have not allowed SARC to take place, the SARC conference to take place. So I don't think a regional perspective on laws is something that we should promote. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a different question, and we will not think, can we reimagine India? Can we rethink how should we really deal with India? I mean, of course, India has a certain perspective on it, but Pakistan over the years is glued on Kashmir, and we are unwilling to change that. Number two, we are also militarily only focused on India. So this means if we want to really reimagine, rethink, we will have to do a lot of rethinking what is in our political, economic, social interest, but that's a different debate we can have. If you want to say something about rule-based order, yeah, please do, and then I'll go.
No, I agree with what the ambassador said about the rules-based order and about regional, trying to set it up regionally just won't work because of the mistrust, the acute mistrust that exists in the region itself. But and principle would be, even in terms of domestic, within a country, trying to resolve conflicts, we always say, bring all parties together, everyone should sit together. So maybe that's what needs to happen again. When the international system was set up after the war, most of the countries were disempowered. Now more countries are empowered. So if they sit together again, maybe the outcome will be somewhat different. So I don't know how practical that is. But I also want to ask a maybe provocative question. Maybe I shouldn't ask this question, but about Saeed, you're the one who sort of gave me the confidence to ask it, because you said that Pakistan is very much glued to Kashmir. Now I was just wondering whether Pakistan could do more to, and what happened in Pahalgam was terrible. That was a terrible thing. Probably it happened from within India, but India is blaming Pakistan. But maybe India is blaming Pakistan because they know that border is porous. Is there more that I know that from a Pakistani point of view, or maybe on a human rights point of view, what happened in Kashmir is all wrong. That India should not have gone and occupied that place. It's Indian occupied Kashmir. But people of Kashmir don't want to be under Indian rule. But engaging in violence just makes things worse. That's all I mean, I know that from Sri Lanka's experience. You know, now India undermined Sri Lanka at one time. We are very suspicious of India. But now we have put that behind us and we are engaging positively with India. India has been very good to us. They've also been good to us because they don't want China to come in, but they have been very, very good to us. So, and India is doing very well, big power. So I want to ask that question, whether there is more that Pakistan can do to de-escalate on the Kashmir front.
Yes, John, we will continue our private conversation on this, and others can also do that, but let me go to Amir Rana for social media questions, and then I'll take a final round of.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think each and every non-state actor is active in the virtual space and social media, and for the various purposes, for propaganda and to recruit for the recruitment purposes. But at the same time, they are shaping the narrative where the states see where their interests converge, and they allow them this space. This is happened in the Middle East, and at the certain level, it's happening in South Asian regions. But this is very complex situation right now. We don't consider these non-state actors as a rational actors, and basically they are shaping the many relationship with our neighborhood or the shaping the regional political landscape. And we don't bother to study them effectively, that what kind of the narrative they are shaping. And if you see that the Pakistan is still suffering, despite we have the 79 organizations being outlawed or being banned by the government, and one of the groups being named by India, that this is still responsible, active in Pakistan. So even those groups, those are not very functional right now. Even their leadership is in the jail. They are going under the transformation, trying to become the non-violent at certain extent. But world is not going to be acknowledge this, and this is also disturbing our normal relationship with China and with the rest of the world and with the Middle East. So I think this is very important sometime to see that, and maybe for Pakistan we got the only one policy which I often write, and maybe my question to the Ambassador Saiba, and this is the India policy. We shape our relationship with Afghanistan, with Iran, with China, and even our relationship with the West and with the rest of the Muslim world. So when we will be able to rationalize things and to see that how we can be pragmatically reshape, review of foreign policies, security policies, this is, in my view, is a major question. And this is basically trigger me to do more work on the study on non-state actors and terrorists, where they become independent and they make the state hostage.
Great, thank you. I'll take two last questions, and of course the organizers have given me 50 minutes to speak as a concluding comment. No, don't worry about that. I'll just get out of here. Just two questions. Yes, one. and two. Okay, go ahead. Sir, go ahead. You all also have a question?
Yeah.
That makes a third question. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, he has a speaker. Go ahead.
My name is Saad Louis. I am a researcher in this institute. My question is from Dr. Jehan Parada. Sir, Dr. Parada, Sri Lanka defeated terrorism, and that too against a formidable force, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. That waged a civil war for 26 years when they were defeated in 2009. So my question is, what key lessons can countries currently battling terrorism draw from Sri Lanka's approach, and which strategies should they avoid?
Okay, great. Let's take the second question, and then there is the third question of this.
Thank you, Chair, Professor Shafqat, and it's a really honor to be as Ambassador Nanjua said, that we are in the non-sexy but intellectual session, unlike the sexy on the Indus Water Treaty going in the other hall. So my question is from my very respected friend from Sri Lanka. The way you talked about the Sri Lanka being the victim of multilateralism and bilateralism. So I would like to ask from you that the current options of unleashing and freeing and refining options within the Sri Lanka after the blunders of the past trapping, what do you see, which countries as bilaterally are the best option and multilaterally best option for Sri Lanka? Thank you.
Great. We go there. And that would be
My question is from Mr. Amir Rana. He mentioned that Al-Shara's government in Syria is a partner with the Turkish government. However, his first state visit was to Saudi Arabia, a regional rival of Turkey, and Saudi Arabia has been committed to paying off Syria's World Bank loans. How do we see this? Are they Turkish partner or Saudi partners?
They are their own partner, but that's all right. Let's get the response from John Pereira, and then we'll come to.
Very briefly to the two questions. The first question, what are the lessons from Sri Lanka defeating the LTT? First is, one would be to get international backing. You have to get backing. By the time we defeated the LTT, we had Indian backing, European backing, American backing, everyone. China, all that backing. Second lesson is that you have to also be strong. You must be fully strong, militarily strong, and be prepared to accept high casualties. That also is that. But the third lesson, not to have overkill. Our people overkilled. And along with the overkill, there was triumphalism. Instead of reaching out to those who had been defeated and who had been violated. So that's a mistake that we made. I've got a lot more to say about that, about these things. And for the second question, who should Sri Lanka be friendly with bilaterally? I think it is inevitable. It is India. Because India is next door to us. So bilaterally, we have to be closest to India. India is a big economic market, but India also is a security threat. We are a security threat to India. But multilaterally with everyone. That also India has to be able to accept that Sri Lanka will not be just only with India. Sri Lanka will be friends with the world, including China, Russia, Pakistan, US, everyone.
Great, thank you. You want to respond? Sure. This is Saudi Arabia, Shara.
Yeah. So I just mentioned that it was the most pragmatic group in the Middle East who maintained its relationship with Turkey, with other states. And it was a very difficult equation for the HTS and with both of these states and many other neighbors. So, but thus, what is my argument that they are quite tactful, rational actors that despite in the very conflicting and difficult situation, they can maintain their relationship with the states. And this gave them somehow the legitimacy to operate in the region. So, and this is, we can think about the few non-state actors operating in our region as well, that how they are manipulating us in our states.
Yeah, but let me be a little more blunt on this, that you have to see it in the Shia-Sunni context. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, both Sunni. The Iran has to be contained. You see, and that's the major reason why Sharia is accommodated. And then there's a geopolitical reason, because Turkey is too close to Syria. And Turkey cannot afford Kurds to really create another state or create problems. So we can definitely continue for a very long time. I just want to make one quick point, and that quick point is that, please try to understand and appreciate that under Trump, US is going through a cultural revolution. And when I say cultural revolution, it's a question of changing norms values, attitudes, and therefore what you are seeing is that there are new values which I may not like. And she mentioned the conservative trend that is emerging, but also the trend that might is right. And therefore, you can push your way through. It is unfortunate, but that's how it is. But in the Cultural Revolution in China, they paid a lot of price. And the target was, again, universities and the so-called elites. But this also implies that new norms, new orientation, new culture is emerging, and my sense of it is that in the short term, which means 25 to 35, that is going to be a broader emerging consensus in the United States of America, and it will have ramifications for the entire world, and that's what we should mentally be ready and prepared. With these words, please join me in...
Last comment to what Rana said. He asked me a direct question.
Okay, go ahead. Please do.
Amir has asked me that should we be reviewing our policy towards India. Amir said, I'm not in the government anymore.
So you are free to speak.
Yeah, that's why I'm speaking more freely.
Very good.
There were lots of attempts that were made by Pakistan, by the governments that came into power, by the Imran Khan government, Imran Khan himself, by other people in the government, by the present government. At every step, Imran Khan said, you take one step, I'll take two steps. There were many other things that were said and done. But you have to understand the reality of the Indian government and the Indian polity right now. The Indian polity right now is looking to be the hegemon in the region, is a Hindu nationalist government in power, wants to project that as their strength, and will do everything for its electoral processes. Now the question that happened in Pulwama when I was Foreign Secretary, that there was elections in India, and the question that was often asked, was it being done to ensure that Modi got more votes, the Hindu votes in India, when Pulwama happened? And it did help him. And it became a big slogan for him in the politics there. Today, there is elections in Bihar, that is one of the largest states in India. So to look at the situation of what happens, a terrorist act happens, or anything that happens in India, you have to also reflect on what the reality of the political scene is in India. So in Bihar, there's an election, and they are running into some difficulties now. And there could, I'm not saying is, there could be a link to it. So whether these people, the resistance people, are offshoots of LET or not, whether they have been taken in by the Indian government and transformed into a resistant group as such, quote unquote, there are several questions that rise. So these are not simple answers. It does not mean a review of our policy. It means we have to be rational about India, about the reality of the Indian polity right now, what it stands for, and what it expects from Pakistan. Now, can we fit in that scene?
All right, we know that all the constraints that Pakistan have got, the attitude by India. But my core question is, can we detach other component of foreign policy, especially with the other neighborhood, from Indian policy, especially with Afghanistan, with China, and this is into...
I agree. Afghanistan, we need it.
Yeah. You see, the thing is that in the academic world, we say foreign policy is an extension of domestic policy. So domestic factors do influence foreign policy. Please join me in thanking, first of all, I must thank each one of them for providing stimulating presentations and really led to some provocative questions. So thank you so much, the audience, and also the speakers. Please join me in thanking the speakers, the panelists, and of course PIIA, Dr. Saeed Khalid and Dr. Masuma for providing us this excellent opportunity. Thank you. Thanks.
That's